Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Bishop WHDX proprietary multi-stage wet dry processed Kenya from Coffea Circulor. And there's the container right there. And yes, I definitely did need to write that down as I was going to have difficulty memorizing all of those words in that exact order. But Coffea Circulor, based out of Arendal, Norway, and this is part 4 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series. And Coffea Circulor is the coffee roaster we have the most familiarity with going into this Advent calendar. In fact, it was their Ruby Batian that finished runner-up during our 2021 KaffeBox Blind Taste Test series, and they have a couple of our favorite coffees for the entirety of 2022. So it's safe to say that they're one of our favorite coffee roasters in the entire world, and I always look forward to seeing what they're offering during the Advent calendar. Again, the way that this works is the notes and tasting wheel are made with the V60, and this cup right here is made with the Chemex. And Coffea Circulor does have a brew guide on their website. In fact, we get asked a lot what our recipe is, and we actually just copied Coffea Circulor's brew guide because it works really well and it's really easy to use. It is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 95 degrees Celsius. They suggest between 93 and 95, and I usually like the higher side of those temperatures for their coffees. And in terms of roast profile, they definitely stick to the true Nordic light roast profiles. Their coffees tend to be pretty light in general, nothing too overly light, but still definitely on the more light side of things. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. One thing that was really interesting right from the start was before I was ever revealed on KaffeBox's Instagram page what this coffee was, I opened up the container just to kind of get an idea of what this coffee was. And instantaneously it smelt of hops, and that was a very strong and distinct aroma for this coffee, and I was really taken aback. And I guess in hindsight, it didn't really surprise me that it was a Coffea Circulor coffee, as they tend to have some very interesting, wild, and out there coffees in general. But right from the start, it yielded this almost wildly hoppy citric component to the coffee. The cup itself had a wide range of depth and complexity, from a very wild herbality on the forefront and a sweet berry on the back end. What's really interesting is the Chemex seems to strip away a lot of the berry components and really seems to accentuate a lot of the citric and hopsy aspects to the coffee. There is still an abundance of brightness in the acidity as well. But the best descriptor I could come up with, especially for the V60, was it reminded me of a clean mixed berry jello shot, or something along the lines of a strawberry IPA, as it had this very interesting candied brightness that rounds out this really long-lasting wild citric complexity. I know I'm kind of wrapping this all around in a circle, but that's just kind of the way I could describe this coffee. And I think that they listed a herbal bergamot as the first flavor note that they had listed on there. And I think they had things like fruity blackberries and overripe strawberries. And while I could see those in the V60, it definitely wasn't as present in the Chemex, as the Chemex really seemed to highlight and accentuate so many of those citric components, as this cup of coffee is just really, really citric, really, really herbal, and really, really wild. From that first time I took in the aroma from the container itself, it had this almost funky aspect to it, but the cup itself maintained a fair bit of clarity that you're going to see in the tasting wheel, but I can't begin to describe just how wild and interesting the citric and hopsy aspects of this coffee was. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And this should be pretty clearly demonstrated in this tasting wheel, as we have 3 level 5s. So let's go through them real quick. The finish at a level 5. That's the first level 5 finish we've had in this Advent calendar. And when I took the first sip, I'm like, okay, well, what am I waiting for? And then a little bit of a cool down, and this coffee just exploded. It just shot up in intensity, vibrancy, and just overall complexity. Yeah, that right there is justified at that level 5. It leaves a very lasting sort of citric finish to the cup. Florality, level 5. Yes, so the bergamot that they have listed on there, the herbal bergamot, yes, that's why the florality and the citric fruit are both at that level 5 mark. They are very intense. They are very strong. They are very lasting, and those 3 things coupled together all kind of complement each other, because that's basically the way this coffee tastes and the way that it lasts, and those things are very, very strong and prominent in this coffee. We have a bunch of level 4s too, so we will start with the savoriness, and yes, it's this kind of wild herbality that's in the cup. The herbality in this cup is almost every bit as crazy as the citric aspect to it, the floral aspect to it. I really have a difficult time kind of describing it because it's something I've never really tasted from a coffee. If I recall correctly, I believe they might have had a rhubarb note listed on here, and that would make a little bit of sense because this coffee just had a very unique flavor profile to it in general. Sweetness, level 4. I guess the sweetness is kind of overshadowed by the wild citric aspects to the coffee because it's still pretty sweet, and the fruit sweetness that you are getting from it is quite nice. I wish I had a little bit more of it to the Chemex because I could maybe even tone down the sweetness to a level 4. It's completely overpowered and dominated by the citric aspects in this coffee. So through the V60, I definitely like it at that level 4 mark, and I don't want to downplay the very strong berry aspects in the V60. Acidity, level 4. As I'm kind of looking back on it, I could maybe even bump that one up to a level 5 because the acidity is quite strong and pronounced in this coffee. I think I like it better there at that level 4 mark, but it's definitely on the higher side of the level 4. It seems to be picking up in the Chemex as well. Let's see what else we have at a level 4. I'm kind of surprised. Berry fruit I've touched on briefly, but the strawberries, honestly, it was a little bit of an afterthought when compared to the very strong citric florality, citric herbality that's with it in the coffee. But it's definitely still there. You can definitely taste a fair bit of it, but I definitely found it to be secondary to that very strong kind of citric hopsiness within the coffee. Cleanliness, level 4, that's kind of the thing I wanted to touch on last in terms of the really high marks, as that's really important because typically when you get something that has this very strong flavor profile to it, it's not always the cleanest, but this coffee still maintained great clarity. It is right there at that level 4 mark. There isn't anything to honestly take away from that clarity, even if it does come off in a slight bit of an alcoholic sense. But I think that's more the flavor because you can have hopsy sort of IPA tasting beers with it still being in a clean sense. So that's why I like the cleanliness there at that level 4 mark. I mean, the body at the level 3 for the V60, I don't think that there's too much to discuss on that. Spice, level 3, again, that's the really interesting herbal component to the coffee. There's a lot in this tasting wheel. Maybe the last thing that I should probably discuss is the bitterness because there was a very strong and distinct citric bitterness to this cup as well, and that's why that's as high as it is. But this entire tasting wheel has some very, very high marks because this coffee was a very, very intense, unique, and complex cup of coffee in general. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this one. This one caught my interest. I always say when I have something really unique and out there and different that is maybe on the cleaner side of things, it will catch my interest at the very least. This is by far the most interesting coffee we've had in this advent calendar to this point, and it's one of the more interesting coffees I've had in a while. But that's typically Coffea Circulor in a nutshell. Their coffees offer great depth and complexity to them. This one's definitely no exception. This is a coffee that I typically wouldn't pick out if I saw all their offerings on their website. In fact, if you've never checked out their website, take a look because they have a ridiculous amount of coffees. This one probably wouldn't be my first choice, but I'm really glad I tried it. I don't know if I could drink an entire bag of this one, but I really enjoyed this experience for what it was. I would definitely go back to the V60, and with whatever we have left in this, I'm going to go back in the V60 and try it again because it's a fun coffee to kind of work with. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you actually really like the citric hopsy aspects of a coffee, I would suggest this one greatly because this had this and it was very clear as well. So you weren't necessarily sacrificing the clarity for a very wild and defined flavor profile, while at the same time still getting so many of the fruit aspects in the coffee, still a great bit of sweetness. So kind of on paper, it had what I was looking for: clarity, sweetness, fruitiness, and florality. And that's one of the reasons I was a big fan of it, but I think what kind of took away from it was the fact that it had some really unique herbal aspects to it, some really kind of earthy, interesting tones to it in general. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. Kind of wish I had an entire bag of this one because I'm sure with a lot more work on it, I could pick out even more things from this really wild coffee. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this one, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the, let me pull it up one more time, Bishop WHDX proprietary multi-stage wet dry processed Kenya from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.